All right, well, here, as promised, is the communication video, one of our policies or communication policy video. One of our policies here in Legacy Student Ministry is what kind of communication can I have with the student outside of Wednesday nights, and one of those policies has to do with texting. And so I want to remind you of some things. I've heard of some text happening, and like I said, this in no way is anybody in trouble or am I upset. I'm just wanting to remind you of a very important policy within our student ministry that protects both students and you, and ultimately the reputation of our student ministry. So here's how it goes. If you are a middle school life group leader, you should never, ever, 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 ever be texting a student, just you and the student. It doesn't matter if you're the same sex or if you're opposite sex. It should never be happening, ever. So that's just policy across the board for middle school students. A lot of middle schoolers have phones now, and so this is a policy that we have to put into place. So what does that look like if you want to communicate with a student outside of Wednesday nights? You call up their parent, or you have a conversation with their parent, and you ask for permission for a group text between all three of you. And even then, your text should simply just be encouragement. I'm praying for, hope your test went well, etc., etc. We keep it strictly business as far as, I'm your life group leader, want to encourage you, want you to know that I'm supporting you, want you to know that I'm praying for you. Parents get to see all those texts. If the parents are non-existent in the picture, then definitely do not be texting them at all, because those parents aren't going to be involved. They aren't going to know our heart. All they're going to see is a 30, 40-year-old texting their kid. That's not them, and they don't really know you. So that's middle school. So please, please, please follow that policy. High school is a little bit different. It's really not too much different, but there is a little bit of a difference here because students are getting older. They're starting to become independent. They're starting to be in leadership positions. They're starting to drive. And so there's just a lot of different elements that come to the table. I have high school interns that work for me. And so a little bit of a different spin, but definitely across the board with high school leaders, you should never, ever, 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 ever be texting another student without either A, permission from their parents, or B, their parents within the text. And so high school becomes a little bit different. Students of the opposite sex should be a no-no, unless, for instance, it's somewhat Wednesday night related. So, for instance, we have a team that does our games for middle school, and I think Will and Grace and Lily all do that together. If Will was asking Lily about game supplies she was supposed to pick up, I would still very much prefer May to be a part of that group, or it could just be Will, Grace, and Lily, because then at least Grace is on that text too. But this is just a protection. I often will have students who will text me, and I will immediately put Annalisa on that text if I don't know their parents. So at least I have somebody else on that text you can go, no, I've watched and I've read and I've seen the nature of their relationship. So that might be the way to do it. Maybe you put me in on that text because then maybe they text you and ask you a question. There's also been times where I've had to go to the parent and go, hey, just want you to know this is happening. They seem to be reaching out about something important, and I don't want to put them off and cause disconnection or an awkwardness, but I need you to know it might be good for you to talk to them. And I risk them talking to them and that student feeling somewhat weird around me because I kind of call them out. But I have to protect myself and our ministry, and I want to protect you and our students as well. So just a reminder with high school, there are going to be more times where students are just going to feel the freedom to text you, particularly once they get your number from a trip because you're a leader, because your name was in the booklet with your number next to it, and you're going to have to kind of gauge, okay, where am I at and where are we at with this student? Someone of the opposite sex, I need to get a hold of their parent. I need to get Nick in on the text. I need to point them to a female leader. If it's someone of the same sex, it's a little bit different. You could probably respond, but you immediately, if we know their parents, you want to reach out and go, hey, just want you to know, would you rather be on this text, or is it okay if I just text them and keep you updated if you need to know anything, because that's partnership. If it's a parent we don't know, I think you need to be really, really careful. If they're not involved in our church, if they're not involved in our community, they can feel threatened by that. So I don't think it's a bad thing just to pick up the phone and go, hey, I just want you to know I'm so-and-so's student leader. They've texted me. They have, in some ways, they're simply just asking for different things, advice or prayer or a question about a Bible verse. Are you okay with that? And just asking. This gets very difficult, and I understand the issue when you get into high school. So, if you ever have any questions, you go, is this okay? This seemed kind of weird. Trust that feeling. Call me, text me. Let's get ahead of that. But I'll reiterate, with middle school, never, ever, ever without a parent. Even if the parent's non-existent or they say, I don't really care, just do it. You need to make sure they're on the text. With high school, if it's the opposite sex, no. Unless it's business related, then put somebody else that's involved in that business. Like I talked about the Lily, Will, and Grace. Put Grace in on that. And that way, all of a sudden, Will's not put in an awkward position with Lily. Or their parents know. They're all in the same loop. And even then, I would say, okay, great. I'm glad you know, but I'm going to put you in on the text just so you can read the text. If it's the same sex, then I think you have to gauge that. I still think parent partnership is important, but you have to gauge, if they're texting you and saying, my dad just hit me, you probably don't want their dad being in on the text. So you're going to have to gauge that because students do find us at times to be safe places, and that's part of why we're here, is to make sure that gospel-centered approaches are happening at home too. So you're going to have to gauge that and just be careful with that. It could be, too, that you have a group of guys that you text out to within your group, and then it's just not one-on-one, too. So that's our texting policy. If you have any questions, like I said, we try not to make it gray in high school. There is some black and white, but the gray areas are the ones that I'd rather you just talk to me about. But this is our texting policy. I would say the same thing is with phone calls. You want to first call parents, or at least let parents know that they've requested to talk to you, and that way we're on the same page. So, love you guys. Once again, we trust in the grace of God that He is protecting our ministry, but there's also policies we can put in place to be smart and keep ourselves from being in an awkward position. So, I hope that makes sense, and we'll talk soon.